私も決めたからもう怖くない。
Hola, comrades. Today's topic of interest, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Back in 2010, an obscure RPG was launched in Japan to rapturous acclaim. While the Xeno games had enjoyed cult success worldwide, the commercial prospects of the series were dimmer. Xeno Saga, originally planned to be 6 parts, only made it to 3. Xenoblade was never supposed to be released outside Japan. It was only after the clamor for its release became too loud to ignore that it was released in Europe in 2011, and then finally in America in 2012. In both territories, it was a major hit, and it has since entered the pantheon of great RPGs. When it was ported to the Nintendo 3DS, it was released simultaneously in all territories. And now we have the sequel. Well, the true sequel. Xenoblade Chronicles X was released in the intermediary, but that was a different game, more science fiction than fantasy, and less focused on a grand, sweeping story. I'm not a fan, and I may at a later time go into why the game doesn't work for me, but it's still ultra ambitious and worth checking out. I thought X would be in the place of a true sequel, but here we are, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. As much as I rail against sequels and other franchise extensions in general, there are franchises I want to see expanded on, and this is one of them. Another was Life is Strange. Chloe's character captivated me, and before the storm expands on it effectively, she's such a tragic, relatable, dynamic figure. And how about Breath of the Wild? It combined the sense of discovery the franchise is known for with the sprawling, stunning open world of Skyrim or The Witcher to make something entirely new. You get what I'm saying, don't you? I'll take new entries to franchises I care about if those entries expand on the franchise in some way, and Xenoblade Chronicles 2 certainly succeeds at that. While it doesn't feature the same characters as the original Xenoblade, it definitely feels like the first game, something that could definitely not be said of X. From the sweeping orchestral music to the fantastical fauna, this takes every element of the original game and amps it up to 11. The team at Monolith Soft have crafted a masterfully dense fantasy world, the kind that makes your head spin when you try to think about it all at once, but somehow feels completely natural while you're playing. Let's take a look at how they pull it off. All you aspiring fantasy creators, take note. Number 1. Lore. The most obvious component to a compelling fantasy world is lore. This is easy to do in theory, but is very difficult in practice. A pimply teenager can think up a batch of Lord of the Rings inspired fantasy lore, but while that's a good start, and a lot of fantasy creators did start that way, it's not enough. Not nearly enough. Good lore isn't a matter of stacking a bunch of meaningless facts on top of one another. Lore should matter to either the current situation of the world, or the characters, or both. If it doesn't, there is no reason to include it. When you're writing lore, you're writing history, but you don't need every single little detail. You're not writing an extensive history book. That's as much of a fallacy as thinking crafting dialogue is just about replicating human conversation. It's a whole lot tougher than that. Lore is about taking the entire history of the world, which could be this vast, sprawling encyclopedia that takes up 20-odd volumes, and condensing it down into what's important. If it doesn't matter to the story you're telling, don't include it. Xenoblade the First was a master at this. You gradually learn the lore of the world along the way. It's built into the narrative. Right off the bat, you're given a concept that could sustain an entire narrative only to learn that it's not even the tip of the iceberg. Xenoblade 2 pulls something similar. You're given this vast world right off the bat. It's a giant world of clouds, and in the middle of it is the World Tree, a towering tree the size of a major landmass, and at the top of the tree is the fabled Elysium. As if that weren't enough, also floating in the Sea of Clouds are Titans, enormous leviathans roughly analogous to the Bionis and Mechonis of the original game. But that's only the start. So much of the world is covered in mystery. There's so much the characters don't know, and that means there's so much for them, and you the player, to discover throughout the adventure. Number 2, atmosphere. This is a very underrated aspect of fantasy. Now, atmosphere always matters, but in fantasy it's much more important. I'd say it's even more important than lore, but it's hard to pull off. You can't be too obvious, and yet you need to ensnare the audience in your world. Crafting atmosphere in fantasy is completely different from crafting atmosphere in realistic works. You have to do a lot more. When your story takes place in our world, you don't need to pay mind to every little detail, just to the ones that help develop the specific setting of your story, like how bright the autumn leaves were, or how beautiful the spring snow looked at night as wind blew it through the orange light of a street lamp. Fantasy is different. The entire world is crafted from whole cloth, so the entire world needs to be brought into the heart and soul of the audience. You need to do a lot more because you're not just highlighting an aspect of our world, you have to transport the audience to a world they are completely unfamiliar with. Xenoblade did this better than any game I've ever played. When you're working with a visual medium, you have two major tools at your disposal: the visuals themselves and the music. In both respects, the first Xenoblade was awe-inspiring. When I was in Satoral Marsh at night, and especially when I was in Aerith Sea, I would often stop playing and just admire my surroundings and listen to the ethereal score. It was an obsession. Monsters be damned, I wanted to live there, and Xenoblade 2 continues with this tradition. As far as music goes, Elysium of the Blue Sky is a yearning, mournful track that reminds me a lot of the first game's title theme. And the Elpis Soul Cave music sounds like a miraculous combination of the Refugee Camp theme and the Satoral Marsh Night theme, which is more than fine by me. And as for the visuals, well, I'll let you be the judge of that. Number 3, characters. There is nothing more important to a story than characters. Without characters, you don't have a story. You have a world, that's it. If your characters are bad, it doesn't matter how elegantly set up the plot is, or how creative and groundbreaking the imagery is, or how complex and thought out the themes are. Your work can't be good. Characters are the beating heart of art. In regards to world building in a fantasy work, characters can be more useful than 1,000 tomes of boring text. They are far and away the best method in which to introduce lore. If you tell me about a war that happened 100 years ago through mindless, rambling exposition that's unattached to any character I care about, I'm not going to have any emotional investment in the war. But if you tell me about that war through a character who's interested in it for a reason that's related to the rest of their characterization, I'll happily listen. But characters can do a lot more than introduce lore. They can be a greater part of building the world than lore, even if the history of an imperial royal family is told so perfectly that it doesn't even feel like exposition, and in fact engages you in the story instead of pulling you out of it. I'm not going to be as connected to the family as I would be if one of the members of my party is a princess from that family. Again, the original Xenoblade did this extremely well. As you went throughout Bionis, you collected party members that were from these various areas, such as Riki and Melia, making your party one that included all the races of the continent, giving you an inside look at these different societies and helping build the world. The same is true in the sequel. The characters are from very diverse backgrounds, providing insight into a vast world that could have otherwise seemed inscrutable, the heart-to-hearts offer heartwarming interactions between these characters, but how the characters behave in these interactions underscores their upbringing and their culture, providing greater perspective on the societies than could be done with only lore. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is one of the great RPGs of the 2010s, right up there with the first game. In some respects, it even surpasses the original. It's a true marvel of gaming, but it's also a teaching tool. If you want to learn how to create an immersive, compelling fantasy world, look no further. If you want to be the best, learn from the best. In an ocean of uninspired, open-world RPGs, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 reveals what true mastery looks like. You know that feeling when you finally lay down your skepticism and accept that a work of art is going to be a part of you forever? Yeah, you'll get that when playing ZC 2. And if you haven't played the original Xenoblade Chronicles, go play it. If you don't know what to expect, I guarantee you'll be in for a treat. It's what Final Fantasy XIII should have been. Sprawling, detailed, and full of great characters and interesting plot turns. RPGs are my favorite genre, and I know I'm far from alone in that. I love how a good RPG pulls you in with its story, ties you to its world, and then lets you out into that world to explore and have your own adventures. Storytelling in gaming can be done in all genres, but the first great storytelling game, Final Fantasy IV, and the first truly outstanding storytelling game, Final Fantasy VI, were both RPGs. There's a reason for that. Gaming, via its interactivity, has a unique power to bond the audience and the world. With their long campaigns and elegant world building, RPGs have a storied tradition of making that world worth bonding to. Anyway, if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more amazing content. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that astounding stuff. Adios, camaraderie!